I'm Karis Hall McCullen. I'm sitting here with my dad, Dudley Hall, and you're joining us for an episode of Papa, I Have a Question. This is a series where we literally just sit down and have a conversation because I realize that I have had the privilege and the blessing over the years when I have a question, when I have a struggle, something I'm reading in my Bible and I don't understand, or I heard it in a sermon, or just how do I do life in general, I've had an amazing resource that I could go to and just say, Papa, I have a question. And as an educator, I know that if one person has a question, usually other people have that same question. So I am inviting you to join us as I say, Papa, I have a question.
Thanks. I'm glad you got a question. It gives us a chance to talk. But while you were doing that, I was thinking about during your college days, we made an agreement that as you went through the educational deal, realizing that you would be hearing things contrary to your worldview or a biblical worldview, that we would talk about what you were learning. And I was revisiting some of those conversations we would have, you in College Station, me here, and he's like, here's what here's what they're teaching, and what's wrong with that, and how do I analyze that, and all that kind of stuff. So we've been doing this kind of stuff a long time.
We have long distance, over the phone, me sitting in your lap in your big recliner chair, all sorts of different ways. We've been lots of questions over the years. Yeah, a lot of those worldview questions we were doing while I was calling collect.
Yeah, that's right. Like the answer to that was no, that was yes, that was maybe.
Let's do this quick. Okay. Well, I want to talk today about the Asbury Revival. So it's exciting. We're hearing bits and pieces about God's doing something new. God's shown up like as if he's been missing or something, But yeah, I want to know what is it? Why does there seem to be, what do we even call it? Is it a new recognition of his presence? Did he show up where he hadn't been, or what's going on? Because I know it's not just Asbury. There's other campuses, there's other places, there's other churches where there seems to be something new going on, or at least a new experience. And so I want to know, what do you think it is? How do we get in on it? Can it be replicated? Yeah, like what is it?
Okay, let's first of all, for some of you may not be aware of it, several weeks ago, months now, at a chapel service at Asbury Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky, there was an unusual sense of God's presence and worship, and it extended for hours, and people began to come in from all over the country. Really dozens of schools were represented there coming, and countries, different people flying in, driving in, and just coming and being in those services that were not promoted by a spiritual leader.
Yeah.
It was just students primarily, and some of the faculty, but the faculty were not trying to run it. Mm-hmm. And it was, was called an outpouring. They didn't know whether to call it a revival or certainly not an awakening yet, but a fresh outpouring of the presence of God and people, confession of sin and whatever. It's been going on now. They had to change the structure of it because school had to go on, and Wilmore, Kentucky is a little bitty town, and thousands of people were coming in there and just.
I saw a picture of like a construction sign, like where it would say slow zone, or like, the electrical construction zone. And it said revival at capacity, or revival full, over capacity, or whatever. Like literally the highway was having to say, we can't take any more people.
Yeah, people were lined up for, I don't know.
Yeah. And you said hours, but days, weeks, it's been going on. Yeah.
So they had to change the structure. So I was talking to one of the adjunct professors this week, who is very familiar with there and keeps up with what's going on. And there's still things happening. Yeah. There's some people in the middle of though they're not having, quote, healing services, there are people being healed as a result of prayer, of being there, whatever. It's not a a tent meeting where it's all about healing. But, when people start worshiping God, God starts doing what God starts doing, and he likes to heal. So there's some healings, and of course there have already been healings of the heart, healing of the soul, healing of relationship. And so healing takes place there. So that's still happening. Same kind of thing, similar thing is happening at Samford University.
That's where you went.
That's where I went. At A&M.
Yep, that's where I went.
Where you went. And like 20 or so other colleges.
Yeah.
And then I got an article just yesterday about an outbreak in the Bronx, in New York, amongst Catholics. In the middle of the Eucharist, there was this sense, and they were recognizing the presence of God in a new or a fresh way. So there is something going on. But get back to your question. Well,
I was just going to say, so what do we call it? You've said it's not yet an awakening or whatever. Can we put terminology to it? Because I'll be honest and just say the phrase God showed up bothers me a little because it's like, no, he's here. He's always been here. He's always with us. So is it a recognition of his presence, or is it an outpouring? That's what it's being called, an outpouring where he's doing things he has not done before. Yeah. Can we, I don't want to contain it, but I do want to understand it. I want to name it,
Well, I think to understand a little bit of the dynamics of it, there are people who've given their lives to study awakenings and revivals throughout history, and they're historians as it relates to that. I was reading one of those recently who says he's not necessarily a believer, he's just studying
the components
of what causes societies to change.
Okay,
so he says there are three dynamics. There's, first of all, there's the problem. A problem arises that is deeper than man can solve himself, and so he starts looking for something he hasn't been looking for before.
Wow.
So that happens, whether you want to think the secular mind or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the next stage is what he calls the paradigm stage, where there's discovered a new paradigm, a new way of looking at things, and that becomes a solution. And then as more and more people buy into that paradigm, then it moves to the power stage. It becomes a movement, where the movement then is finding ways to implement that new paradigm. Well, that works that pattern, that model works very well with the revival, with the gospel.
Absolutely.
So if we apply that, we would say, okay, so our society has gotten to the place in the church, outside the church, where there's hopelessness, helplessness, despair, strife.
It's not
stress.
working.
It's not working.
The way it works is not working.
That's right. And so there's a hunger. There's a hunger for something that we thought was. There's a hunger for something real, and we thought we had it, and now we're realizing we don't.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, so what is it?
Yeah.
So people start praying, and then they start seeking. Well, if you seek after God, he will be found.
Yep.
So one of the arguments that's always in historical revivals is, did God just do it, or did we pray it down? Like, who did this?
Yeah. And can we formalize it?
Yeah. And so during the Second Great Awakening, Charles Finney was one of the leaders in it, and he believed that you could find out what man can do to get God to come in that kind of manifestation. And, I don't agree that you can do it quite as rigid as he did. But the answer is it's both. Right. God loves us enough that he says he has chosen to do everything redemptively on the earth through human instrumentality.
Right.
He said to Eve, okay, the serpent came and deceived you and got y'all in this mess, and now you're living in fear and isolation and alienation and all of that. But I make you this promise: through your seed, I'll crush his head. Now, God could have said, hey, I'm sending Michael and archangels down, and I'm going to do it myself. No, he said, I've chosen to do it through human instrumentality. So what he does the rest. So how does he get us involved? Well, he makes us hungry in order to feed us. He makes us thirsty in order to give us a drink. He gets us dissatisfied, so we will look for a solution. Yeah. So I see it as both. So God, in His mercy, is saying, I love my people, and I love the world.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted my people to be special, so they could bless the world. So he's making a remnant of people very hungry in the church, and they're praying, and they're seeking, and they're worshiping. And as they do, God is answering.
Yeah.
And he is answering with opening our eyes to His, as you said, already presence.
Yes.
And so it looks like He showed up because you just opened your eyes.
Saw it, yeah.
And you're just like, wow, He's been here all along, but I didn't know it. I didn't know how to appropriate it. So I'm seeing, far be it from me to try to explain how God manifests Himself.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to explain it as long as you know that He has the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
Because God has made reality a combination of the heavenly reality and the earthly reality. He doesn't separate it. So this is the heavenly, this is the secular, the physical, the natural.
Yeah.
It's like, no, since Jesus came, this is God becoming a man. Incarnation says the two worlds have come together.
Right.
So
Kingdom is the kingdom.
God's free to manifest Himself in unusual ways, unusual to us, not unusual to Him. So you can be going along and whatever, and Saul was going along doing. He thought he knew God. He was working hard for God. He's walking along, and all of a sudden, a light from heaven strikes him down, and Jesus said, "Why are you persecuting me?" He's like, "I'm not persecuting. I don't even believe in you. I'm not persecuting you." He said, "Yeah, but you're doing it to my people. And when you touch Him, you touch me." So it's like, oh. So Paul, in the middle of his crisis, in the middle of his problem, gets a new paradigm.
Right.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This Jesus that I thought was a heretic, He's the Lord of everything.
Yeah.
And so, goody for him, he goes to the desert for 3 years and gets that paradigm wrapped around all of his learning and all of his stuff. It's like, oh, this is what he meant by the presence of God. It's not about a temple. It's about His presence. This is what he meant about the inheritance. This is what he meant about the people of God. This is where the law fits in. So he began to get a paradigm. And then after the paradigm, he bought into that, and other people were believing it until it became a movement. And the early church then affected the whole known world.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the pattern. And so hopefully that's what we're seeing now, is in the midst of a very confusing world where all the surveys are saying that people are more stressed, full of anxiety, more hopeless than ever, before. In the middle of all of that, people have prayed. God said, okay, I'll answer. And I'll open your eyes and let you see who I really am and what I'm doing. So I think it's the right thing to do for us to pray. We may not have time to do this, but back in the 70s, I was in seminary at Fort Worth at Southwestern Theological. A similar outbreak happened at that same Asbury College and Seminary in Wilmore. And a couple of the guys were invited to come over to our deal, but we already had chapel set up, and of course, you
can't mess it up. You can't change the schedule.
So we invited them to stay, students to stay afterward if they wanted to hear what those boys were saying, and I stayed, and several hundred more did, and they just stood up and told what had happened. They had a chapel service. Somebody, got up and began to confess sin and the presence of God. Not that confession of sin is what brings God, but that's what happened. And so as he humbled himself, God began to show up, and it turned into revival. Lasted 146 hours.
Wow.
So anyway, they came, and they just, 5-minute testimony.
Yeah.
And in where I was, there was this sense of wow, awe. It's like you don't want to raise your head.
Mm-hmm.
You're afraid you'd like to see him, but you're afraid you might.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was that sense of awe. It's like, wow, God is loving and he's holy and he's here.
Mm.
Well, like you said earlier, he's always been here.
Right.
But now you're recognizing it, or he's opened your eyes to a fuller degree so you can see it. I don't know how you explain it.
No, I love that. I love that. The opening the eyes, and even walking through it with Paul, where it was like he saw it differently, and then he had to figure out like that paradigm shift. And it's like, I gotta, how does it work? I see something that I can't deny.
Yeah.
And I want more of it. And so that the hunger leads to the revelation of the eye opening, and then the, okay, yeah. So we're in that stage. We haven't gone through the 3 years of figuring out how it all works yet, and wrapping it around. That's so good. That's such good news.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it also means that the hunger wasn't a bad thing.
Right.
The hunger was a good thing. I think sometimes we, in our desire for instant gratification, the microwave, society, it's like, I want the paradigm shift and the knowledge and the understanding, and I don't want to have to be hungry to get there.
Yeah.
Right. I just want everything to be, I just want to see him without the awe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which when you sit around and think about it, how stupid is that? I mean, how presumptuous is that to think, okay, I've already seen all of God that there is. And so, I can live with this. It's like, are you crazy?
You're not glowing yet.
That's right. There's so much beauty in him that, okay, so if it takes me being depressed a little bit to go, okay, I'm not seeing it, to get me to seek for it, then okay, that's a good thing.
What a great perspective to say, like, okay, if I have to go through this to get more of him, I'll go through this. Yeah.
So, as you and I talked about before, one of the misconceptions we have about God is that he reveals himself to the good. Well, since he's a God of mercy, mercy only shows up or is only manifest when there's a mess.
Need, yeah.
So if you're adverse to mess, you're adverse to mercy.
Yeah.
And I'm adverse to mess.
Me too.
I'd like everything comfort, convenient, in its place, categorized, named, understood. Well, you don't need mercy for that. And so God's his whole deal is just mess after mess after mess after mess with mercy confronting it.
He shows up in the mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
Anyway, I've been in a few other revival, and we didn't know what to call those either.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk more about those.
Today?
Next week.
Oh, next week. Okay.
All right. Thanks for joining us. It's exciting. God is doing some things, and God is answering questions that we've been asking for a long time, and that people have been praying for, and we're beginning to see some of that fruit. And so it's a good time to be alive. It's a good time to know the gospel. Okay, join us next week as we'll talk about some more of Papa's experiences.